the framing of immaterial archives, which, in reading about it, tied to like writings about Black diasporic poetics of loss. As I understand it, think of archives like beyond language and images and materials, obviously. There's this thorough line with all the works that I see of erasure and loss having to be attributed to like the silencing of leftist movements specifically, or what leftist movements sort of aspire to accomplish. To remove materiality and the power of like historical objects. Did you approach these works with the intention to represent immateriality or like as a subject, or to like elicit an immaterial experience? Is that a too dense of a question? Like, yeah, like when approaching the work, how are you thinking about immateriality or the materials you were presented with? I feel like your works were more like poetic in form, and yours was kind of a little more didactic.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming and staying, and thank you for organizing this and to Los Angeles Filmforum. I think that for me, using all the epistolary material that I found in my mother's archives, I was thinking about immateriality, but also I was shocked when I started to read those letters. I mean, they all, and these works all sprang out of the absence, and that absence is basically my mother who had passed away, but also that, and that made me in some way to accept her inheritance and her cultural and historical inheritance, not also to accept, but to look for it. In me digging in her belongings and reading those letters that weren't addressed to me in first place. But once I did that, I was really struck by how I felt very much identified with those voices. And at the same time, how I felt that there was a big gap, or of course an historical erasure. I was born in the middle of the dictatorship in Argentina, and the difference of seeing is like, for me, the dictatorship was always a history of origins and not of endings, you know? And finding all those letters where the dictatorship was not in the horizon in some way, it was there, the repression was there, but I think that for my mother's generation, that type of sociability and that sociability that they had through the letters ended, and it was a project, of course, like in those letters, the name of Perón comes a lot, and for that generation, a lot of leftist Peronists thought that Perón was going to bring socialism to Argentina, which of course he didn't. And it was very interesting for me to see the same voices that I grew up with, and seeing them with that energy, that political energy, and that political friendship, and that urgency to share histories from what was going on in Buenos Aires, and what was going on in Algiers, and what was going on in different parts, like in Paris, and how friends were becoming more politicized, or relationships were breaking up. I guess that for me, moving from that immateriality of, which is of course, the letters are materials, but hearing the voices, like in the teapots, re-embodying those voices, but in this ghostly sort of animation, was my way of dealing with. I needed to hear those voices again. I don't know if I'm answering your question,
No, yeah.
but yeah, maybe that's like the poetics is that strategy to reanimate what has been silenced or what has become, for me, absent because of the death or historical distance.
I think in terms of immaterial archives, my interest very much lies also what an archive omits and what it doesn't contain. And that's why I think I was really interested in juxtaposing certain archives together too. In terms of especially the time cover, when I see that cover, it's really hard for me to not think about what actually happened versus what the cover of the image says. Or when I see the coup leaders' paintings, it's really hard for me to not think about the songs written for everyone he murdered. So in terms of, I think, immaterial archives, my very much instinct was also to bring these together in a way to make certain experiences more legible or understandable and find a way to how to represent them, I would say.
Yeah, going to, yeah, ask another question for the two of you. All these works, even though they're all like historical, obviously, feel like they come from a place of urgency, like you were saying, and that makes a lot of sense. Of like, there's this also like layer of an emotional or urgent moment, and they come off like really present. Like they're trying to catch up with the moment as well, and it's not. With both of your films specifically, it's hard not to think of the current right-wing parties in power in both like Turkey and Argentina. And like, the Beverly are finally defeated, allegedly. And I'm curious as to how much of like in present politics and the erasure of what's being erased now, like how much intentionality was there? Was that like coming to the work, or did it just like emerge just by association with these topics?
Yeah, I think that the works for me, or these works are a way to historicize the present, and in some way I feel that we are in the same moment.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting.
Yeah, and no, it's not a coincidence. I think that for me, seeing that sort of like utopian version of, I just feel that until some things are still unresolved, we are going to be looping in the same historical time with, a change of maybe degrees of intensity, and but certainly like these works emerge from a sense of historical urgency.
I think it's also through systemic erasure, at least for my case, we keep reliving the hauntings and among the ghosts of what happened. That was never acknowledged. So also in what I'm working on or creating, I generally find myself trying to trace these ghosts rather than maybe actively thinking of, I'm gonna look at the past to critique the present. It's not necessarily what runs in the foreground of my head, but mostly, I think, finding traces of the hauntings and what has happened has been more important to me, I guess, in my work.
Yeah, I actually read that sentiment um, and like all the works in a way. I was thinking of like, it's kind of a weird stretch, but with your films, I was thinking of the difference between like like La Belle and La Bête and Beauty and the Beast or something, like animating like these like ghosts and spirits haunting objects and walls and like kitchenware and these things that are like kind of fragile also and are like prone to rust. And I was thinking of like the difference of something like La Belle and La Bête to Disney, where if you're unfamiliar with that film, it's like much closer to the original story and its creepiness, where it's like this very uncanny, theatrical, campy sort of animation that elicits like, I don't know, like the actual fear of ghosts or something. And it, like the fear is very present, even though these ghosts are ancient. Yeah, that's it. I read that, I think. And that in a way like talks about these like present traumas, and I like that about also the last film felt very, I mean that I think that one was the least historical in a way. Or I mean it is historical, but it was sort of like kind of the most like trying to archive the present and this
Yeah.
inability to make a material or something. Like instead of like commenting on its lack of materiality, it's sort of attempting to kind of create, and it fails. Which is like there's an extra layer to that, thinking about the war going on now and like different, how like that must be just totally different, that experience of though even what those boats are probably doing is also probably very different. So it's interesting. He did manage to capture a moment, to capture like what that was before this like very defining, probably something that has changed the landscape of that area completely for a long time. Yeah, the Hande. I was actually curious about. Did you want to say something?
No,
Okay.
no.
Actually, I had a friend who did some kind of residency also at the Reagan Library.
I didn't do it.
Oh, yeah,
Clarify.
but she would come home and like kind of talk about how insane accessing that archive was. You have any I don't know, like she would talk about how like anything she was encounter was like always redacted. Specifically because she was doing research on the Gulf War, Reagan and the Gulf War. How was your experience in the I'm just curious about.
I mean, I went to the archive and the museum a couple of times, but I mostly did my research through their online library and like totally stole all of their videos and got them. So I didn't necessarily go and ask them for permission or anything. So I did my own thing with it. But the space itself, I kind of mostly went to see where these type of materials were being kept. And it was fully insane and scary. But I wouldn't say that I conducted my research in there. I was mostly home in front of YouTube and getting their videos. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, another question for you. Yeah, there's something about like what you're juxtaposing also, and like the kinds of art that these political figures are making. Like, or I was thinking of the specific like separation of like populist art and fine art, like these more introspective, kind of personal, intense paintings, and like something like the songs, or maybe not the song, I don't know about that, but like Reagan's acting. Or I also think of like Obama. Obama's like artistic expressions post-presidency is like kind of trying to be a celebrity or trying to like make these like Spotify playlists, or it feels like more populist, whereas like the painters are like, I don't know, it feels more like kind of towards academia or like art history or like kind of directly towards something else, but it also feels like they're grasping at something, and then I don't know, there's something, to me there's a difference there, like, and also like I was thinking of how Reagan emerged from, like he didn't need like a post artistic kind of like redemption or something. It was sort of already like similar to like Trump or something, like he's sort of like the well was poisoned before he became president. Like he was already kind of like people think about his past work, and I don't know. I don't know if that made any sense, but
No, I think, but in terms of Reagan, I think you're thinking from a perspective of now. One reason why Reagan didn't need it is like his whole acting career was baked into how he presented himself during the presidency, and through that acting and performance, he therefore didn't need it. And there was a very long time where in the US people thought very highly of Reagan. So he actually did not require to recorrect his legacy, like different than Kenan Evren. When Kenan Evren retired, people were really trying to organize against the coup. So he tried to correct his also legacy through painting and looking like, oh, I have now a painterly career, I'm fully someone else, etc., etc. So he tried to rework kind of his public image, I would say. Similar to Bush in many ways too. Now he paints veterans, etc., like makes veteran portraits in a way that, I don't know, very bizarrely aligns with war in Iraq and what he did during his presidency.
Yeah, there's just something to me about painting specifically that's like they find it pure or something, or
But who are they?
like Bush and
Oh, I see. Okay.
yeah, I just find it interesting that they both chose painting specifically. It's like not totally that populist, or it's like they're reinventing their image, but it's like kind of to a narrow audience or something. Or
Traditional, perhaps.
yeah,
I don't know, while I was making the word, a friend of mine said that what Bush and Ebran are doing mostly through the painting is like art therapy. So I don't know, that might be another thing for you to consider.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
no, that's true. Yeah, I'll have just a couple more questions. I was also curious about what your mom was doing in Algiers, and what was the experimental film, third world experimental film meeting?
Yeah. So my mother's friends were the organizers of the first Third World Filmmakers Meeting. This was a meeting of filmmakers that happened in 1973. It was sponsored by the Algerian government, and they brought filmmakers all over the so-called Third World. It was mostly filmmakers from Latin America, Northern Africa, like the Maghreb region, and Central Africa. And my mother was an architect, but she moved there. She stayed in Algiers for a year, collaborating with these filmmakers, these are Argentinian filmmakers that wanted to make a documentary about the colonial movements in the region, and specifically about the nations that were still struggling for their independence. I think that at that time it was mostly the Portuguese colonies, and she was an architect, so she worked in some projects, architectural projects, and while she was collaborating with the filmmakers, because they had to go back to Argentina to make the second iteration of the Third World Filmmakers meeting that happened in Buenos Aires in 1974, and that's a letter of Jorge Giannoni, who's complaining about how difficult it is to get the second meeting approved and all that. And it's basically because 1974 is the year in which like Perón comes back, and then he stays in power for a year, and then he dies. So all the politics move dramatically to the right. Yeah, that's. And then my mother decides finally to go back to Buenos Aires, because it was also a moment where a lot of people that had moved abroad were coming back to build a new country. And yeah, and then so they basically lose funding and they never make that documentary. And that's what I'm researching in my project now, trying to reimagine this documentary and trying to go through the letters and find all the information I can from the descriptions and the planning they were doing. Yeah.
Amazing. What happened to the meeting, to the Third World Filmmakers meeting? How long did that last?
So this was basically a week in Algiers in which these Third World filmmakers were meeting. Not only, it wasn't a film festival, they were meeting to actually make agreements about how to produce films and how some countries that have nationalized their film industry, for example, Algiers or Cuba, could sponsor other political filmmakers in other countries where they were being persecuted. So they were trying to make agreements on production and distribution, and they were basically trying to create a network so they didn't have to go through the European labs or through European grants to produce their political work. These were all political filmmakers. So yeah, they were really trying to create a third world film industry and a network that could bring all these countries that were not aligned together. And this also happened right after the coup in Chile. So the sense of urgency was very big for all the Latin American organizers. Yeah.
Anyone have a burning question?
Thanks for being here and for showing films. I thought both, particularly with the singing of the teapots, and similarly, specifically George Bush's speech, they were fun, or very funny. I think in a way, at some points, kind of like jarring. But you're telling something personal, I think, particularly in the case of your mother's letters, really affecting your own voice, really intimate things and pretty grave and kind of massive stories, but there's such a distinct impact of that humor. And I'm curious how you connect humor and grief, or whatever you call that memory in your work?
Yeah, for me, I experimented a lot with the reading of the letters, and I mean, most of these friends of my mom I met, and they were incredibly playful and joyful, and even if, it was a hard time, the post-dictatorship return to democracy, it was a very exciting time, but also a time of grief, because so many people and friends had disappeared or had moved abroad, so all the sociability had been broken, but I really had to connect their voices to life, and for me, finding that playfulness, and also connecting through the Argentinian idiocracies, that word. It made me feel like they were my friends, and that I could make fun of them in a completely loving way. And yeah, humor emerged out of that, out of me reading the letters multiple times and trying to be, solemn and serious and thinking like, this is dead. I don't want to represent them as dead people or as ghosts, really, but as people that are both ghostly and alive at the same time, and that can produce a feeling, a bodily feeling as a laugh or. And also thinking of them as young people, with all their. And I think also the epistolary thing is so interesting because you're communicating with someone, but you're also writing for yourself and doing a lot of self-therapy while writing. And yeah, I wanted to have fun with them and, convening with them and have a little bit of a party of sorts. Yeah. I don't know.
Thank you for the question. It was beautiful. Thank you. But in terms of Bush's video, I think my relationship to that video changed after watching it a couple of times, where when I first encountered the video, it was very uncanny and scary for me. I actually felt very scared and in a certain way, I don't know, had a shocking experience. In terms of thinking of him and actually seeing in representation him referring to himself as an artist in Old Dog, Learning Tricks, whatever. And after multiple times watching it, it was only that I started being able to laugh at it and kind of start, I think, internalizing it in a certain way of that, this is absurd comedy, but that wasn't my first relation to the video. That has changed over time. And humor is very much a significant part of political organizing where I come from, because people feel like if in such a word system we cannot laugh, we're gonna die. So laughing is a very fundamental part of surviving. And with that decision, I decided to keep that bit in there as I think maybe a cathartic release, because then I realized that as I kept watching that clip over and over again, it started producing some sort of a release for me. So that's how it ended up there. But yeah, thank you.
I would also say to the Guerrero film, because that was also, I think, the most explicitly absurd or kind of humorous work. Especially the longer version, it's the aesthetic of it is a lot. I don't know. You spend more time with it, and you have a lot of different other thoughts of what all that means. But there's a sort of, I think that one speaks also to a self-deprecation. I think she's trying to comment also on her own whiteness and the absurdity, maybe, of speaking of colonial history while being white, simply enough, and also the absurdity of the histories that she is talking about, or how pineapples are related to these colonial museum hoarding histories of violence. So it's also a way to kind of put an exclamation point on the absurdity of what they're talking about, and how absurdity maybe is a way for violence to happen a little easier also. These political figures are, clowns in a way, and that's I think part of their power. Is uses of humor and uses of theatrics and it makes them feel more level to the ground. Any other burning questions? No, I think we'll leave it at that. We can talk in the bar area if we want to. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
that was great.